Baruch Hashem. Today's daf yomi is Menachos daf. I am Vav Menachos 76. We're going to start with the Mishnah on 76a. It says the Mishnah, Kol Menachos to Unos, Shalosh Meos Shifa. All the Menachos require 300 rubbings, V'chamesh Meos Be'ita, and 500 poundings. That you basically bang it with your fist. So what does that mean? Shifo beita bechitin. So the Tanakamas are the position that the rubbing and the pounding is on the wheat to get the berry off and without any bran on it. Rabbi Yossi Omer b'batzik. He says it's on the dough to make a very good dough. Kol menachos bos eser. All the menachos that they're brought, they come with 10 loaves, either chalos or rakikin. That's the position of the Tanakama, which we've seen 4 or 5 times throughout our Masechta already. Except for the lechem aponim with the showbread, which is we'll see is 12. The chavite kohen gadol shem and the carbon of the kohen gadol, which are 12. The shem bo shtemisrei. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. That's the position of Rabbi Yehuda, where it's Rabbi Meir Omer kulam bo shtemisrei. They all come as 12 loaves. Chutz michalos toda and the zeros, except for the Thanksgiving offerings of the toda. And the Naziros, Shehem Bos Esther, that they come 10, the Nazir brings 10 loaves of chalas, 10 of rakikin, and the Toda is 10 loaves of 4 different types of loaves, as we'll see on Amma base. So the Gemara says, Tana shaf achas uboet shtayim. How do you get to the 3 to 5? First, you rub it once, and then you pound it twice, and then shaf shtayim, and then you rub it twice, and boet shalosh. So you have the same ratio of 3 to 5. You rub it twice and bang it 3 times. So altogether, you have 3 to 5. By Rabbi Yirmiyah, amtuye v'asuye chad. It's going back and forth, rubbing it back and forth. Is that one? Udilma amtuye v'asuye is trey, or maybe that's 2. Gemara says take it. We leave this question unresolved. So then the Gemara says, Shifu bita bechitin. Rabbi Yossi Omer bebatzik, that you do the rubbing and the pounding on the wheat. Rabbi Yossi says on the dough. Ibayu bebatzik bechitin. When Rabbi Yossi says on the dough, do we mean on the dough and not the wheat? Odoma af bebatzik, or maybe even on the dough. Tashma come in here. Detanya shifu beita bechitin. One position is that you do the rubbing. We're in the middle of this. I am Vav Amadav 76a. So the Gemara says Odoma. The Tanya Shiva Bita Bechitin, Rabbi Yossi Omer Shiva Bita Bebatzik. So the Gemara says, "Ibo Bebatzik Bechitin is on the dough and not the wheat," or Dilma, or maybe Af Bebatzik means even on the dough. Tashma the Tanya Shiva Bita Bechitin, Rabbi Yossi Omer Shiva Bita Bebatzik. He says it's on the dough, and meaning say only on the dough and not on the wheat. Kol Menachos Bo Shtemisrei, but they all come as 12 according to Rabbi Meir, except for the Toda and the Nazir, which are 10. So the Gemara says, how do we learn this? Lechem aponim behedjik sivbei. Lechem aponim, it's written explicitly. It says 12 chalos. It says by the lechem aponim that it should be 12 chalos. Behedjik sivbei. It's written explicitly. But chavite kohen gadol, and how do we know chavite kohen gadol? Asya chuka milechem aponim. We compare the word chuka, which says by the lechem aponim chok, and also it says by Kohen Mashiach chok. So therefore, since it says in both places, we compare Gzer Shava of the Minchas of the Kohen Gadol to the Mincha of the lechem aponim. Kol Menachos to both Esther Minah. And how do we know that all the other Menachos are brought as 10 loaves each? So this was the first part, was going to the Tanakhama. Says the lechem aponim and the Minchas Chavit and the Kohen Gadol are 12. But how do we know that all the other Menachos come as 10 loaves? So the Gemara says, Gamar milachme toda. We learn it out from the Thanksgiving offering. Ma'awan eser, just like over there, there's 10 loaves. Avkan eser. So we learn it out by comparing it to the Toda's offering, which is 10 loaves each, also here. So Gemara says, why do we learn it from the Toda? Why don't we compare it to the Lachem Aponim and say, Ma'awan shtemisrei, Avkan shtemisrei, just like there is 12, also here is 12. Gemara says, Mistavra milachme toda. No, it's more logical to assume that we compare it to the Lachme Toda. Shekain, what are the comparisons between the other Menachos and the Lachme Toda? Shekain Yachid, they're both individual offerings. Hametz Nadiv, they're voluntary. Shem, and they have oil. And Nipsal, and also they can become disqualified. So let's see what Rashi says here about that. What does it mean by the nifsal? Hold on. Uh, uh, let's see what the Rashi says. By the nifsal, that they're nifsal through nosar. So if they're left over overnight, that is what Rabbeinu Gershom says that's how they're disqualified. And shalom b'Shabbos, they're not brought on Shabbos for shalom b'tumah. And they're also not brought in a state of tumah. So the Gemara says, meaning to say, since it's not a communal offering, they don't override Tumah. Other Rabbi Gemara says, we should learn out from the Lechem Apanim. Shekain, Hektish, they're both Hektish, meaning to say the other Menachos are Kachi Kachim, while the Toda is Kachi Kalam. So therefore, the other Menachos should be compared to the Lechem Apanim, because they're Kachi Kachim. So the Gemara says, Vovona, they also both require Lavona. And also, and unlike the Toda, which I guess the Toda is not, they don't have Lavona. The Toda breads don't have Lavona, and also matzah. The Toda bread has chametz in it. The etzem, each is brought by its own, whereas the Toda is accompanied by an animal. So Gemara says hanach nafishin. Still, it's more comparable. It's better to compare it to a Toda because that is more characteristic. So the Gemara says, the Gemara says, well, if you can say that something which is learned through Xera Shava can then go teach through a Binyanav comparison, why don't we derive it from the Chavitin, the carbon that the Kohen Gadol says, and say Mala on Shtemis, just like the Kohen Gadol, which is derived 12 by Xera Shava to Lachem Apanim, and then do a Binyanav to the Menachos of the Kohen Gadol, Haftan Shtemis. The Gemara says, no, Mistabra. It's still more logical to assume to compare to the Lach Metoda. Why? Because they are the following commonality. Shekain Hedjot, they're both non-Kohen Gadols. Regular person can bring them. Shesnadev, they brought on a Dava. Chatzayin, the Minchas Chavitin is brought in halves, that he brings the whole, and then he either gives half in the morning, and then half at night, or he chops each one in half and brings that in the morning and brings that at night. That's the Machokas we saw earlier in Masechta. With pigol, they can become pigol, they can become pigol, meaning to say, if you have an improper thought, but that's only if there will be a matir. So there is a matir by a mincha, regular mincha, because there's a komate. But in the case of the toda, it's the blood of the animal. But in the case of the Kohen Gadol, it's all brought, so there's no matir. So the Chavitin does not have a matir. And Shalom b'Shabbos, they're not brought on Shabbos, Shalom b'Tumah, and they can't be offered in Tumah. Adrabah, it's more logical to compare to the Mincha of the Kohen Gadol. Chavite Kohen Gadol have a fly. Shkin Yisraron, they're both in Yisraron. Kui, they're both brought in utensil, Hektish, Ulavona, and Matzah, the Etzem, it's brought on its own. And also Hagasha, there's Hagasha, which is, remember we said, touching the corner of the altar. The Ishim, and then there's the fire. Gemara says, Hani Nefishim, still, and Bahani Nefishim, and it's more numerous to compare to the Chavitin than the Toda. The Gemara says, no, still, Hedjot mi Hedjot Adifle. It's better to compare it to a carbon Hedjot than to compare it to the Kohen Gadol. To a regular person's carbon than to a Kohen Gadol. Meir says, Kul and Bo Shtim. Meir says, all the wolves are 12, with the exception of the Nazir and the Toda. My Kasavar, Gemara says, what is Rabbi Meir's position? If he's in a position that something that's learned by Xer Shava, i.e. Minchas Chavitin, can then be learned through a Binyan can then teach all the other Menachos. If that's the case, Yoach Mechaviti the Kohen Gadol, then he should learn out from the Mechavitim and the Kohen Gadol that it's 10 loaves. That under those circumstances, that it's 12, but then he should compare it to the Mincha of the Chavitin of the Kohen Gadol, and he should compare. He should compare it to the Minchas Chavitin of the Kohen Gadol, the Hani Nefishin. And so since it's more, there's more of them. And he said, everyone, he will learn it from the Lachem Apanim and Hektish Adifle. And if he's going to be at the position that it's not going to be able to teach, he could still learn out the words of the other Menachos from the Lachem Apanim. And although the other Menachos have more in common with the Toda, but still they're hektish, because they're the Menachos are hektish more than the Toda, which is going to be considered to be a lesser degree of hektish, whereas the Toda is going to be kochikalim. Because anybody could eat it and in all of Jerusalem. So therefore, hektish me hektish other place. So we'd rather compare the lechem upon Tola menachos than by comparing all the other menachos to Toda, since those are kochi kalam. Chutz mi lachmei Toda nazir shein boas eser, but the lachmei Toda and the nazirs come 10 wolves at a time. Lachmei Toda behedjek sivu. Lachmei Toda is explicit because it says in the pasuk that the 10 wolves from each, but nazir is the amar mar. Where is that? It says shlamav, because it says Shlamav in the passage of the Toda, but Rabbi Shalmei Nazir comes to include the Shlomim of a Nazir. So it's 10 loaves. Amar Rav Tuvi, what are the 10 loaves from 4 types by the Toda are the Chaos, Rikikin, Revucha, which is like scalded, and Chametz. Let's say you baked the Toda, but you didn't do 40 loaves, you only did 4. But you did 1 of each, yatza. You fulfill your obligation. It says, but don't do 40? Well, mitzvah. That's just ideally. But he doesn't have to separate truma from them. How can you do it if it's only a single loaf? And if you're going to say he separates a piece from each one, and that's a truma. The Torah says, parus. It says he shouldn't take a broken loaf as a truma, take a whole one. Gemara says no. That for shina maybe separate the truma while it's still in the dough stage. Meisvei, Gemara says no. Call Menachos sheriba b'midas chalasan. All the Menachos who have more loaves than you need, or shemia b'midas chalasan, or if you have less, ksheros. Chutz milachem apanim chavitikon gadol lachmei Toda u'naziris. You can't have less by the Toda. So that's what Shmuel says. So the Gemara says, "Huda Amar ki Tana." No, Shmuel is holding like the following Tana, who said, "Nitanya kol menachos sheriba b'midas chalasan." Any menachos where you had sheriba b'midas chalasan, any menachos which you have more loaves, or shemiyah b'midas chalasan, ksheros chutz milachem apanim chavitikon gadol. So that Tana says that it's okay, except for the lechem apanim and the chavitin. The yeshomim aflach may Toda nazir. Some include it, but the first Tana says the Toda you can have less. So that's the opinion of Shmuel. Amar Funa minchas ma'afe sha'afa chala achas. Let's say you baked the mincha and you only made 1 loaf yotza. My time, and what's the reasoning? Matzos ksiv without the vav. So therefore, even 1 loaf. Matzkavur papa time of the ksiv matzos, ksiv matzos, but it was written in the plural low. But by the Thanksgiving offering, the chsiv matzos. You see, even if you have 1 loaf by each one by the Toda, it's okay. So Gemara says, Shmuel argues with this ruling of Rav Huna. So okay, fine. The next Mishnah: how much grain do you require for the menachos? Ha'omer hayaba. Isaron, the Omer comes from an Isaron of flour, which comes from Shalosh Seyin, which is 3 Seya. Shtei Lachem, Shtei Isaronim, Mishalosh Seyin. The Shtei Lachem is 2 Isarons from 3 Seya. So in the first case, they get a Mincha of Omer, they get 3 Seyas of barley, and they sift it many times, 13 times, until it's just an Isaron. Whereas the Shtei Lachem is 2 Isarons of flour, and so they don't sift it as much. Also from 3 Seyin. Lechem Apanim Esrim V'Arba Esronim. Lechem Apanim that comes from 24 Esronim. Esrim V'Arba Esronim may Esrim V'Arba Sein. Lechem Apanim is 24 Isarons, which is then sifted from 24 Seyas. So the Gemara says, "My time." And what's the reason? What's the reason why a single isaron of flour must be produced from as much as 3 seah? Even the mechadesh asi, since it's coming from the new crop of misaoran asi, Yisrael Muvchar lo asi el mishalosh saying the best flour, and Yisrael flour can only produce from 3 sa'as. Shtei lechem shtei esronim mishalosh saying 2 loaves of bread is 2 esronos from 3 saying. Even the mechitinos, and since they're coming from wheat, alpha the mechadashas, and even though it's coming from the new crop, shtei esronos also mishalosh saying 2 esronos can be produced from 3 saying. Lechem apanim esron va'arba esronim. Lechem apanim is 24 esronim. Yisrael va'arba sin from 24 saying. My timer, keeping the mechitin also, umiyashin also, esron muvchar asimiseh. Since it's from wheat and it's old grain, one esron produces a seah. Tan Rabban kol menachos sheriba b'midos esronan. Any mincha whose measure of esronim was increased, o shemiyet b'midos esron, or it was decreased, psuos, it's going to be disqualified. Riba b'midos sa'in shalan. Let's say it increased their number of seah, o shemiyet b'midos. It's still kosher. Did that more or less. Says the Mishnah, Omer Hayamenufa. The Omer was sifted b'shalosh esrei nafa through 13 sieves. Shtei lachem b'shtei esrei. The shtei lachem through 12 sieves. V'lachem apanim b'achas esrei. The 2 loaves of bread through 12 sieves, and the lachem apanim through 11 sieves. There was no set. I was always manufa called tzarcha maybe. He would bring flour that was finely sifted. As it said, you shall buy fine flour and bake it. Manufa called tzarcha until it's completely sifted. Then Rabbanan badka begasa, bedaka begasa. Let's say the Brisa says if you checked it through a coarse one, bedaka begasa. What does this mean? So, Rabbi Shimon Elazar Omer Shalosh Esrei Nafos Hayib b'Mikdash. There are 13 sieves in the Mikdash. Zul Malamizu. Each one was above the other one, meaning say increasing levels of coarseness. Alyona Koeta Sub. And the top one collected the bran. Tachtona Koeta Salas. And the bottom one collects the fine flour. They had different sizes until they got everything. Rabbi Shimon Omer Beloyal and Kitzvah, there was no set number. Tanur Rabbanan Stoas. So he says, it says in the pasuk, Soas vafiso, so you shall buy the fine flour and bake it. Soas. That teaches us that the flour for the lechem apanim, you buy it as flour, which is sifted. And how do you know that for the lechem apanim you can buy wheat? You could buy wheat. I might think even by other menachos you can buy just the wheat. You don't have to buy the flour. Tamomer osa. Torah is saying it. The lechem apanim mipnei achisachon. The lechem apanim they allowed you to buy just the wheat or even though you didn't have to buy just the flour, because by the regular menachos we wanted you to buy the standardized flour. But by shtei lechem, but the lechem apanim is very expensive. So we're worried about the expense. My pnei achisam. What does that mean? I'm a Rebbe Elazar. Torah chasa. I'm a Menachos. Torah is worried about the money of the Jewish people, and so therefore they allowed them to buy for such a regular offering of the 12 loaves of the lechem apanim. It was allowed to buy the wheat. So where is it? For this tachsiv, because it says Hashem said to Moshe, speak to the rock, v'shkisa eda v'esbe'aram, give them water and their animals. We see that it was a concern for the money. Now we go up to the next chapter, which take it up on Sunday's daf, which is the 8th chapter, which is called Perek HaTodah. Baruch Hashem will stop here and repeat this on Shabbos.
Thank you.